we've given up on giving them exact forecasts because it's
not
like
forecasts, please.
Yeah.
Never again.
Yeah.
Like, how much money are we going to make off our Facebook ads this year? And I was like, boy, if I knew that, you think I'd be working here?
Yeah.
Like,
on today's episode of the podcast, we have Bryan from Freedom Grooming, and Bryan's taken an incredible route to getting to his role as head of marketing at a rapidly growing male grooming brand. His journey started off as a journalist and has led him all the way through a route of data science to his position now. We're going to be getting into everything from data science to culture and mindset around growth, and hopefully settling the debate of what's more important at the moment, data or creative. Sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy the episode. So Bryan, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Doing well. How are you?
Yeah, really good, thanks. It's awesome to have you on the show today, and I'm really looking forward to diving into a lot about your background, especially coming from a data background. I have a lot of questions in today's interview, and having worked alongside you, one of the things that I always felt was that you had so many intelligent ideas when it came to data. So selfishly, I just wanted to pick your brains for an hour, and hopefully the questions on the podcast today will also be super helpful for brands that are looking to improve their e-commerce performance through the use of data.
I'm honored to be here and like flattered that you would say that, because I feel like a lot of what I do in my life is just taking in new information, processing it, and trying to get it to the sort of unconscious level of how I do my work as quickly as I can. So I have a lot of feels about this. So excited to be here, and like I hope I can shed some light on stuff and help people out.
Amazing. And you've just taken up a position as the head of marketing at Freedom Grooming. But before we get into that, I would love to hear how you got started in the industry all the way through to your position as the head of marketing at Freedom.
Sure. Well, this is a really interesting journey, and I'll compress it really quickly for you, because I think it's something I've had to grapple with because it's been very non-linear. And I've actually pivoted a lot of times in my career, just kind of chasing what was really interesting me at the time. And it's made a career that doesn't really make sense on paper, and it doesn't make sense on LinkedIn. And it has equally been like a really powerful practice of like, what do I want to do? Like, what do I care about doing day to day? At the same time, it's been that's been like really important and useful, and I'm making sure I'm living my truth or whatever. But at the same time, it's made me really difficult to market to hiring managers because my story doesn't make any sense, right? So I started as a journalist years ago. I went up through school, in college and stuff, and I was like, I'm going to be a journalist. And from there, I was chasing like, what is the coolest, most competitive, and most interesting sort of journalism that was going on? It was data journalism, and it was like web. And I was like, oh, well, I've got to do that. Ended up in grad school where I was like doing that, had a couple great internships in New York. And I was like, wait a minute, like this job is really tough. The pay is really tough. The bottom was falling out of the journalism industry at that time. And I think we found a new plateau and a new place, with like paid newsletters and stuff like that that's happening. And but like for me, I just didn't see that happening. So I was like, what am I doing? How can I pivot my skills? Went to a data science boot camp, a 12-week data science boot camp called Metis, METIS, here in New York. And I shout them out because I love them, and they're probably still a leader in like short-term data science training. And from there, jumped straight into a marketing agency because it was the easiest way for me to get my hands on as much data as possible. And every step of the way was like, I was never thinking about some end goal. I was never thinking about, how it implicated, what the implications were on my career or my resume or anything. I was literally just chasing, what skills do I feel like I need at this time? What is interesting to me? What is paying me? What do I need at this moment? And, from working in marketing agencies, I worked at Digitas over in the Publicis holding group for a while, which was a really great place, managing billions of rows of data, reporting off that, analyzing that, really seeing how marketers think and how agencies work was like really critical. And then did brand strategy at Droga5 for a little while, doing data strategy there, but more like not as much reporting and more like earlier up the chain of the marketing process, as it were. And I moved there because I was like, wow, I want to get like further up this process. I don't just want to be like, these are how the ads did. I want to like jump much earlier. And then from working there and working with some really great brands, I was like, wait, like they're not giving me half the data that they have. I only have my like marketing data. Like I want more than that. And realized that what I really wanted to do was be on the brand side. And I didn't have a word for it at the time, but you know, this is the growth industry. And I was like, oh, that's what I want to do. And so, you know, right in 2020, when like all of the chaos happened, you know, I jumped from Droga over to Form Nutrition through I randomly had tagged Form in a LinkedIn post because I was like, I want to work for brands that I like, that I care about. So I was like tagging people, reaching out to people all the time, tagged Form in a LinkedIn post, and Damien, the CEO over there, and co-founder, just DM'd me and was like, are you open to like taking a contract? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And that grew into like the head of growth role over there, where I was able to take all of this storytelling, marketing, advertising experience that I had just from being exposed to it and from making it my whole life into, you know, one giant cohesive strategic thing. And this is a common thing I think you see throughout people who do growth work, is like some of them, sure, they come up through growth, you know, businesses or agencies or whatever, but like a lot of us are just like hackers who are just like bouncing around and combining a lot of our skills, you know, in kind of a T shape to do this head of growth work. And so I was there for a little while, and then fully just got headhunted by, you know, a really great company that I work for now, Freedom Grooming, because, you know, I can see post COVID and at these economic times that a lot of companies that are having a lot of revenue are trying to hire heads of marketing, heads of growth, like really senior level marketing leaders. And frankly, it's been really tough to get those roles because I was you look at my resume, it's like journalist, data scientist, marketer, marketing leader, data strategist, head of growth. And then they're like, this doesn't make any sense. Right. So, but I think that's allowed me to not stick to the bad habits that a lot of different people in each of those practices have dealt with. You know, I read a really great book called Mastery by Robert Greene a long time ago. And he talked about how mastery is not just the act of doing the thing a lot. It's about like taking information from all these different sources and coalescing it into one thing. And if you ask me what my number one job is and what the job of head of marketing is from now into the future, it's like, how quickly can you learn stuff, not from your own experiments, but from other people's work, from being on DTC Twitter, from going to conferences, and combine that into your own knowledge. You know, I don't think there's a straight way of doing it anymore. So that's how I got to where I'm at.
Yeah, exactly. It's just that. It's that approach to accelerating your own learning and your own journey. And if you only rely on the lessons that you learn along the way, your learning's not going to be quick enough. So that what you really need to do is start tapping into the learnings and the mistakes of others by really going down that digital marketing rabbit hole, so that you're reading the conversations on Reddit or hearing about what's going on LinkedIn. And when you start doing that and learning from the community, you really start to develop those tools. And I think that's always been our approach at the Graygency, is to be as curious as possible so that we're constantly learning and we don't assume that we know everything. And it kind of reminds me of one of the first times I really joined a community, which was Tim Bird's Ad Leaks. And when I signed up and went into the actual community forum and started consuming the content, I think I spent a whole weekend just watching videos of other media buyers talking about their different approaches to bidding and strategy. And I was so pumped to go into work on Monday because I just felt that what I'd done was expand my toolbox based on other people's learnings. And I had so much that I was able to bring to our clients by taking that approach. And it's almost constantly being in search of another tool for your toolbox to apply, so that when a problem arises, there's that old adage of to the man with a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. But if you have a hammer, a screwdriver, and a wrench in your toolbox, then you're able to find a solution to a problem without just relying on one source. And that's really our approach to digital marketing. But I'm also really curious, Bryan, you've worked predominantly in your last 2 roles with quite a high direct response focus. But I know previously you have worked on bigger brand awareness pieces. And I was really curious, like, how do you find the difference between brands that are really focused on big picture brand awareness versus those that are just die-hard driving sales?
I don't see, well, what I see is that brands will pick one usually. So they'll pick one based on their the data they have access to, the way they do their sales. Like, for example, some of the biggest brands I've worked on have no real sort of internal sales data that's useful in any way. They use, stuff like IRI data, which is like an amalgamation of retail and like all these other sources to give you like a sense of directionally where we're going, like in a geographically. And then other brands who have fantastic data and maybe have strong performance marketers on their team will be like, we only care about this like very detailed attribution, which isn't even real. Like, they only care about this direct, performance conversion focused sort of ads. And that gives them both blind spots, in my opinion. There's so much more that when I worked on some of these huge brands that were only focused on like, well, we want TV spots, we want to be on every sports team's jersey, like all of that. Like, when you're focused on that stuff's really not easy to track, and the ROI on that's hard to track. But at the same time, the ROI on that is inherently immeasurable. But then you have people who are very conversion focused, and all they ever care about is like, did this ad sell? And I'm like, but we're not even thinking about the top of the funnel, where it's like, do people even know what your product is? Are people even aware that they have a problem that you have a solution for? So the worst part about my job is I have to convince people on both sides of this spectrum that the other half is valuable to their business. So I'm always being like, you can connect data to your awareness work. There's a couple proxies we have. Is it a perfect attribution? No, but like, trust me, because we've been here and we've done this before. And trust is something you'll hear me bring up a lot, I think, in this call, in this podcast. So, and then for the performance marketing people, you have to be like, I know that the cost per acquisitions on your top of funnel awareness ads look horrible, but that's not the point. People don't even know who you are. Like, and we need to stick to this real marketing funnel that I think as marketers, we get very tied up in our tactics, and we get very tied up in our execution, whether it's how quickly are we buying TV ad spots and what time do they appear and where's our logo on the field, on the pitch or whatever, or we're getting really detailed into how are our ad campaigns set up. Are we running thousands of ads? Like, are we doing that? Like, I want to experiment as quickly as possible. And we forget that that's not the point of this. The whole point of this is to sell a solution to someone's problem. And I think it behooves us all, especially in this day and age when like there's so much turmoil in the ad bidding and buying space, to take a step back and be like, what's the point of all of this again? And that's the hardest thing to do.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's actually really funny. One of the best conversations I've had about marketing over the last couple of weeks was with a super experienced old former CMO of Walmart. So his background is like old school agency, that Don Draper kind of Mad Men agency approach. And I was explaining to him that all the problems at the moment with attribution, with performance marketing, so that we can't track what we used to track, and things becoming a little bit more difficult. And his immediate response was, but then you just need to apply the model that like we used to apply. which was measure the things that you can measure, how much you've spent on a campaign, and how much money that campaign has made. And it was so refreshing that someone who isn't a super high-tech D2C store owner who is optimizing everything understood the landscape in far better detail, and took this approach of telling me that the only thing that you need to really focus on is going back to the real things that matter, which is creative, having amazing visuals, telling a story, and then the copy to match to supplement the storytelling and the visuals. And if you take that approach of pairing a really, really cool message with an awesome piece of creative, then the attribution problem almost solves itself. And it was just such an amazing, refreshing conversation to have. And it actually prompted me to go back to read a book by David Ogilvy, The Confessions of a... oh God, I want to say Madman, but I don't think it is. I think it's Advertising Man, and I've probably butchered that, so I'm going to get flamed in the comments section, but that's okay. But again, in that book, it's quite funny. He said something which ties in with what you said about only representing brands that you truly believe in. So that what he was saying is that he took his holidays on cruises with P&O. He bought his suits from the tailors, I think it was Brooks Brothers, that they represented. He drank wines from the vineyards that his agency were promoting. And it was just that whole principle of not running campaigns or selling products that you wouldn't sell to your own wife or partner. And yeah, it almost feels like the advertising and marketing world is going full circle. And instead of looking at these latest influencers, we should actually be focusing on the people who tread the path. So the Ogilvies or those from the big agencies. But what I'm also really, really interested in, Bryan, is going into a new position in a company that's growing as quickly as Freedom. What's your mindset going into a new organization, and how do you actually approach that?
Well, listen, so I love metaphors. It's really how I understand my world and how I can like pull better from other sources of information and like apply it to my own life. And like I have read so many books on mindset. I mean, from the first time I got pushed out of a position because of politics, and the first time I got laid off, and the first time I got fired, I was always very like internally looking. I was like, what am I doing wrong? Like what's happening here? And I'm realizing, like, as a marketer, as a growth person, you're pretty similar to like a Premier League manager. You're being asked to show up and fix everything, and you don't necessarily have the authority or the reach to change and fix everything at once, but you're being asked to like fix everything very quickly, right? And so when that naturally fails, the first couple of times you do it, you're like, am I bad at this? Am I bad at my job? And like for me, the mindset is, okay, if I'm going to show up and do this work, there's some reason that they've hired me. There's something that they know that they like from me, and then there's something that I know that I can bring that maybe they haven't identified yet, right? So figuring out what your individual value add to the company is really critical. Like my mindset is that, as a data scientist, as a marketer, like the experiment is the king of everything that I do. I will always know that I will succeed because, like Einstein, I will try to build the light bulb 10,000 times. If it fails every single time except once, then great, I figured out what doesn't work, right? The trick is those sort of expectations and that sort of mindset where it's like, I know I will succeed at this because I will just do it over and over and over until I figure it out. And I know that I'm committed to the structure, the rhythm, the discipline to like do these experiments right. The problem with that is that assumes a runway of time to get up to speed and to fix things. So, my mindset is constantly like, how can I bring something valuable to this team? And then not thinking just about leaders, like thinking about for anybody at any level, if you're coming in, like, why did they think they hired me? And then what can I actually bring? And find something that you build within yourself. It can be, well, I'm the most organized person ever, I'm going to diligently take notes at every single thing and deliver it to everyone. And eventually I'll be the only person who knows everything. So like they'll need me, right? Or maybe you're the creative spark. That's like, you're bringing all the ideas, then they didn't have ideas. They had execution people. But maybe they thought they hired you because you were also an executor, right? There's all of these like, find what you can add value, and there's all these different ways that I think you can do it. And so for me, my mindset is like, I'm very disciplined, focused, and organized. And as a marketer, and I'm very fast. I have a very fast rhythm with my work. And that, as a marketer, that's not something you usually see at agencies. You see really bad crunch times, you see kind of weird working hours and stuff. And then sometimes, like, or if you're on the brand side, you see like a extreme slowness, right? Where we're like, well, no, we'll just move at like a glacial pace and it's fine. So like, I already know with a lot of the DTC practitioners that I work with is that like the speed in the organization is something that's very valued. And so quite often I show up in my first like 6 to 8 months on any team. And this goes all the way back to even when I was on the agency side. My first like 6 to 8 months on the team, I'm very much like a project manager. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to make these decks for you. But at the same time, hey, are you like getting your stuff done? Are you doing this? Are you doing this? Let's write it all out. Let's write a plan out so that we all know what's going on. Just because I've studied those sort of things for so long and I've found them so useful to my work. So, for anybody listening to this, figure out what you bring that is that competitive advantage that you add to the team, and just dial in on that. And if you stay true to that, you will be successful in your work.
I think one of the things that I love that you just said was that whole idea of needing to find out what doesn't work in order to actually learn what works in a campaign, and not being afraid of that. And this is one of the things that I really try to instill in our team at the Graygency, is that core value of embracing failure. And when you put it in a pitch deck that you say, hey, we embrace failure, there's people in the room that think, oh my God, these guys are talking about failure. And in the world of marketing, where there are a lot of agencies talking about sunshine and rainbows and 100x ROI, that there's not a lot of people who like to talk about experiments that fail. But ultimately, like, if you're not running tests that are failing, then you're not pushing the envelope enough to find out what is actually working in the world of digital. And our job as marketers are to try out different hooks, to try out different angles, different creative, different copy, to figure out what's working and what's not. And to use your analogy of runway, like, it's our job as an agency to come up with ideas. And if we run out of runway, then that's okay, but we should never run out of ideas in the process. And as the founder of an agency, one of the things that I can accept is that the runway or the budgets run out before we've managed to crack the code. But what I couldn't accept is for a brand to be able to sit there and say, hey, these guys didn't try. Not trying is completely unacceptable, and running out of ideas is unacceptable as an agency. I think that's one of the things that's really driven us as an agency, is not being afraid to go back and try things. And I tell the team all about a story about the Facebook marketing experts, and I'm sure that most people listening will have had a call with the Facebook marketing experts, and one of their big buzz pieces of advice are traffic campaigns. I think it seems to be something they talk about in every single call. And I've been in this game for 5 years now, and I've always gone back and had a try of a traffic campaign following on from a marketing expert call, thinking maybe this time the traffic campaign will work. And guess what? Most of the times it doesn't work. But by going back and testing it, it just shows that we're looking for those gains within the ads platform that if you're just running conversion campaigns all the time, you're not going to discover. Yeah, and I keep going back and I'm like, there must be something in it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be suggesting it all the time. But what I've learned with traffic campaigns is it's all about how you look at the traffic campaign. And a lot of the time when you are running traffic campaigns, you're going to get these high volume of visitors that increase the bounce rate on your site, so you're seeing lower site visit times. But every now and again, you might find a good audience to tap into with a traffic campaign that it's not necessarily going to convert because the user is further up in the consideration phase. But what they will do is they'll fuel your retargeting so that you can then convert them later on. And it's a case of needing to look into tapping into the right audience. And as an agency, what we're trying to do is we're trying to run a lot of tests all the time in different ad accounts, so that we're testing account structures, different campaign optimizations, different bidding strategies, in order to find that one little nugget that works. And then we share that strategy across the brands that we're working with, because in the grand scheme of things, we need to test a lot to find things that work for us then to be able to scale the performance through the things that are working. And what we find is that a lot of brands and a lot of agencies, they're too afraid to actually test different tactics, so that what they end up doing is they end up running the same conversion campaigns time and time again, top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom of funnel, conversion. And sometimes when things aren't working, they have no solution, so that they don't have a plan B or a plan C. And if you're not running tests, then you're not going to have those things that you can call up and trial out, or to lift performance quickly.
It's so challenging, right? Because, if you're going to say, well, we're committed to experiments, but you're not going to say we're committed to getting wrong experiments, then you're setting yourself up for failure. Like, I'm not going to lie to you. I interviewed for maybe 40 head of growth positions, like over the last, I don't know how many years. People constantly trying to reach out and steal me from companies I was at, or like be like, oh, we have this great thing or whatever. And every time I would get into a call with the founders, the easiest sort of gut check is to be like, all right, well, what if I show up and I turn this on and none of our ads work at an acceptable CPA for like the first year? Like, what if? And they would go, well, that's unacceptable. And I'm like, well, that's like what's going to happen with whoever you put in this role, right? Because that's what you've been doing for the last year, and you fired the last 3 agencies you've had, and you've fired the last 2 heads of marketing you had. Like, why do you think this is going to change? Like, and they don't want to hear that, or I come into the call and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to join as your head of growth, but I'm not going to guarantee you any sort of revenue number. I'm not going to do that, because we can't. Because to do that would be to put unrealistic expectations on the agency, on me, on everyone, for something that's not as replicable as they thought it always once was. Like, we have to run these experiments because nothing is guaranteed and nothing makes sense. A sort of customer journey that works for a high consideration product for one brand, you could take it directly to their competitor and it would flop horribly, even though it's the same product in the same category. There's so many variables at play that experimentation is the only way. And like what we bring is those ideas, and that like constantly shipping through what other people are making and what they're thinking and what they're doing, and just applying all of it. It is a lot of like spaghetti against the wall from a tactics perspective, but at the same time, there is a very well-trod and very well understood pattern of human psychology and ad creation and creative work that I think is really where we're going to find the cutting edge moving forward. But that is the not fun part. It's much easier to go into Facebook and flip a couple buttons than it is to sit down and have a real, like a confessional moment with yourself where it's like, maybe our product sucks. Maybe our product market fit is not right. Maybe we need to make serious changes to the way that we communicate about our product. Like, because that is a very uncomfortable conversation that people don't want to have. And frankly, like after doing all these interviews, I'm like, when I see a company come across my LinkedIn inbox, it's always a recruiter, because they're always working with recruiters because nobody can find anybody. I can look at the product and basically immediately know whether or not my ads are going to work. It's like, no, that thing is crazy. Like, that's crazy. Like, I don't care what your revenue numbers or what your P&L looks like. I already know that the ads that are working right now for other brands would not work for that product. So like, I'm not even gonna, your customer acquisition cost is decided before you ever go to market, because it's all about, are you even making something that's useful and helpful for people? And I'm not going to drag anybody, through the mud on this one, but I know you've definitely seen products where you're like, that's a reach. Like that's a reach.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for anybody who's being like, yeah, I'm going to show up at this company and I'm going to do what Andy and Bryan said. I'm going to do all these experiments and I'm going to like push really hard. You also have to make sure that the thing you're trying to sell is not a lemon. Like, you don't want to be the used car salesman at the lot, like trying to sell the car with a transmission that's going to go out in like, 1,000 miles or whatever. You don't want to do that. That's not good for your career. It's not good for your mental health either. So, that's something that marketers struggle with, I think, every day.
I also think it's sometimes the belief that a product can scale to the moon, and there's a lot of brands that see the guy on YouTube saying that everybody can have an 8-figure business and that it's easy, but actually there's bigger economic factors at play. There's market size, market caps, and market saturation, so that there's only really a certain point that brands can reach, and it's not endless scale. And I think there's a really good phrase or a really good quote about not even the tallest tree reaches the sky. No, actually, no. Wait, it's not even the tallest tree reaches the stars. I think it's a Warren Buffett quote, but yeah, I totally butchered it.
Oh, you took the right thing from the quote, though. You took the point, and that's what I guess that's what matters, right? Like,
maybe I'll just have the quote, and then it's like, yeah, it's the idea of the quote, but. It's something we see a lot with brands when they come into planning and budgeting, that there's just this idea that, hey, we're going to spend a lot of money and we're going to drive a lot of revenue and the sky's the limits. And they think that, yeah, huge revenue is just a result of spending more. And as the head of growth or the head of marketing, like, I'm really, really interested in when you go into a brand, like, how do you actually go through the process of budgeting for growth?
So there's like my every time approach that I do every time. And then there's a contextual one that I think has happened since 2020. So like since COVID, essentially. So when you're showing up and you're saying, okay, what are our budgets going to be? I could go endlessly into the formulas that you could use, Taylor Holiday's Four Corners accounting principle, whether you use cost caps or whatever, using CBO or whatever you're doing, however much budget you should have. Some people have that awareness slush fund where they're like, oh, they're like comfortable with that sort of situation, and others are not, where they want to put all their money into conversion. When I'm setting budgets, the way I think about it is your growth engine is literally an engine, right? You need to give it fuel to grow, but at the same time, you don't want to burn it out. So if you're looking at your customer acquisition costs, if you're looking at your marketing efficiency ratio and stuff like that, it's not like, oh, I want to have the best ROAS in the world. Like if you're getting like a $7, $8, $9 ROAS, you're not spending enough money. If you're getting too low of a ROAS, you're spending too much money, right? Everything for me is about ranges. So not only do you want to be driving, but you want to be holding back in specific areas so that like you're staying within a range that creates profitable, useful growth for you. Now, if you're like a brand that just took on $150 million worth of VC, like Athletic Greens just did, and I know everyone and their brother has seen those ads. They don't care about that, right? Because they have a mandate that they need to grow as fast as possible. But the vast majority of the companies that you'll join actually like don't really know what they're trying to do when it comes to that. Like they're like, well, we want to scale to 50 million. And I'm like, that's really great. But like, what are the steps between here and there? How much money do I have in my budget? And they'll go, we'll give you as much money as you need. And I'm like, great. Like, I don't like it when they don't have flat numbers, because then I have to dictate it. And then it's like, Bryan, why'd you say we're spending this much and not this much, blah, blah, blah. So for me, it's all about controlling that range, because it looks really great, and we'll be so confident as marketers if we walk into our monthly executive meeting and we're like, we got a 4-to-1 ROAS, like, and you are the town badass, like you did it, you hacked Facebook. That to me tells me that, you know, if you're profitable at like a 1.5, like you should have spent a lot more money. And it's tough to be that, to get the rest of the executive team to level with you and understand, like, we're doing really well in these certain things, so I'm going to dump money on them until they don't look as good anymore, because I know that I have this much extra space that I can grow into with that ad, with that tactic, you know, with whatever it is. And what sucks is sometimes your attribution is not necessarily great for that. You know, sometimes you have teams that go, well, I want to flip that around into a sports sponsorship, and then it's, you know, there's $100,000 off your plate that you don't have anymore. So for me, it's all about like getting everybody agreed to, this is what we're going to spend, these are the targets that I'm looking for. If it gets too high, I'm going to put more money into it. If it gets too low, I'm going to pull back. So everybody knows these are the decisions we make off the metrics we have. And there is no one size fits all for people's budgets, to answer your question. But if you are thinking about ranges in everything that you do, from, you know, if your conversion rate is too high, you don't have enough traffic. If your customer acquisition cost is too high, like you need to find ways to fight that down. But if it's too low, you need to spend way more upper funnel. Like, you can go through all of your metrics and find those ranges. And I think that that works for pretty much any budget that you might have, whether it's $1,000 this week or, you know, the $50,000 a day I've spent on like really crazy Facebook ads before. So, you know, like $1 million a month on like stuff shot on an iPhone. I think those rules apply to all of them. For more detail on that, and like what those ranges actually look like a lot of that's built off my experience. I think that like Taylor Holiday has really smart thoughts on this, on how to stay in the ranges. And like, I would love to like see an exploration somewhere that somebody puts together eventually of being like, these are the decisions you make off of the metrics you see, because I think that's something we don't talk a whole lot about.
And I think that's one of the challenges with budgeting, is that everything looks easy in a spreadsheet. And one of the things that paid media agencies really, really need to get into is actually knowing the ins and outs of the brands that they're working with. Because what can happen quite a lot is that without that information, the agency is sat back on a 3 ROAS and patting themselves on the back, saying like, well done us, aren't we great? We did an amazing job. And then ultimately at the end of the month, it comes out in the P&L that the brand maybe didn't make money, and everyone's like, oh, maybe we're not as amazing as we actually thought. And brands have to be forthcoming in that conversation with their agency. So when the agency are asking, what does it cost for that item to make? How much does it cost for you to ship that item? Then the brands need to come forward with that information. And one of the ways that we phrase it with a brand is we ask the brands, instead of what are your ROAS targets or your MER targets, and everybody's going to be happy with an 8. What we actually ask is we ask, what is the minimum profit percentage that you would be happy with at scale? And this changes the mindset, because what that then enables us to do is find the point where they're happy to scale, and we're able to do our job. Whereas if we ask the question, what ROAS are you happy with? And they say an 8. Well, guess what? We're probably not going to hit an 8. But if we know that they're happy to scale on a 2, then it enables us to actually push and scale things. But again, going back to that idea of, or that core value of embracing failure, as a team, we want to be in that position where sometimes we have to go to you as a business owner and say, hey, guess what? We tried to scale your budget to 5K, 10K and beyond per day, and the returns or the profit has decreased. So next week, where we think that the biting point is, or the point of diminishing return is around this level of spend. So we're going to go back to that and see that, see if we can increase the profitability again. And then guess what? We're probably going to try to scale it again. And I think that what we have in the agency world is that there's a lot of agencies that are too scared to send over a bad report or a difficult report, one of those reports where it says, hey, we didn't hit the target, or guess what, we didn't make you as much money this week, or maybe we broke even this week. And I think that if your agency is constantly sending you positive reports on performance, they're not doing their job 100%, because the name of the game is performance marketing, and part of performance marketing is trying to push for growth. And agencies are so comfortable just sitting back and writing those easy reports. It is so much easier to write a report when times are good. But ultimately, going back to that point of we need to test things to learn what didn't work in order for us to find out what works. We need to send some reports that are less than positives now and again for us to be able to send those mega reports of, hey, guess what? Our year-on-year growth was at this point and everybody's happy. And that's the main reason why when we get asked to budget, and we get asked to budget and forecast a lot.
We've given up on giving them exact forecasts, because it's
not
like
forecasts, please. Never again.
Yeah.
Like, how much money are we going to make off our Facebook ads this year? And I was like, boy, if I knew that, you think I'd be working here?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. And it's when they ask for those field of ranges, and you end up with a chart that says, well, if you spend this, you could make this much, or if in this situation, this is how much you could make. And then you start to branch it out where you say, yeah, but if the conversion rate is this and you spend this amount, this is how much a brand can make. Or if the brand spends this, the conversion rate is here, the average order value is here, and the returning customer rate is here. This is how much money you need to spend in order to be able to make this amount. But then if this happens here with the website and the conversion rate drops and the AOV stays the same, and what generally starts to happen is the brands start to think, oh, actually, this isn't as straightforward, and actually this person isn't in control of all of these different factors. And this is where it becomes really, really difficult to actually have just one forecast for a brand. So I love that idea of forecasting with ranges. And we have brands that take this approach, and it's definitely our preferred approach, so that the brand will define when you're at an MER of X, you have carte blanche to spend as much as you can, or when the MER is at this level, you can spend up to this, and if the MER is here, you can spend even more. And what that allows the brand to do is it allows them to grow really, really quickly, so that with the things that have happened with Apple, with attribution, they're not looking at the ROAS in Ads Manager. They've almost protected themselves from this by getting this learning years and years ago, so that at the moment they're still continuing to grow because they're not looking at those data points that don't exist anymore. And it's really, really refreshing to work with brands like that, because let's be honest, Ads Manager at the moment, it can be a really, really ugly place for brands and agencies.
I could see it in my nightmares sometimes. I'm like clicking through the tabs and I'm like, oh no, oh wait, what? Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I sometimes go back 3 years in Ads Manager and look to the good old days where ROAS was amazing every week, and sort of give myself a pat on the back and say, yeah, you were a good marketer back then. But that's exactly it. Like looking back in Ads Manager and seeing, hang on, your approach to marketing didn't change. The only thing that changed was the platform and the Apple updates. People are still advertising, consumers are still buying, so maybe, just maybe, it's something to do with attribution. But yeah, that's another topic for another day. But what it does lead me on to quite nicely is when you are someone who has such an expansive background in data and data science, and you go into a new role, how do you go about communicating that to laymen or the muggles amongst us?
So there's two types of audiences that'll be listening to this question and having two different angles. So one, there's like the people who are super data skilled, and they're like, well, you can't communicate it with a layman because it's too complicated. And then you'll have people who like don't really understand the data, who will be like, how do I go beyond just like reading a number off? like in my monthly meeting, right? Like there's two sides of this. I came from a communication background first. I mean, as a journalist first, and then I learned the data. Some people who come from the data side first have to learn how to communicate, and that's like a really tough thing. And then the people who usually come from the communication side need to learn how to like run a proper regression, right? Like those sorts of issues. So we have two different people in our audience here. When it comes to communicating about anything, not just about data, I'm like, what does it mean? Because what happens in these reports is you show a menagerie of numbers. And then the first thing that you want to do is just copy and paste it because you know what it means. Like, so you just copy and paste it in there. Your clients have a completely different agenda, whether it's an internal stakeholder, an external stakeholder, they have a completely different mental picture of what's happening in their business and what you're doing for their business when you show up. You know, whether or not you're a data scientist with a PhD in pure math, or whether or not you're an analyst that got hired straight out of school and has never worked in Excel before, they have a completely different idea. So the critical thing for me is, yeah, you can come in and some bosses want to see tons of these numbers. Some of them don't. The critical thing for me is, what does it mean? If I could never show a dashboard again and instead have the trust, and this is me bringing up the trust again, that I could just come to a meeting with a one sheet write up of this is what happened, these are the decisions we need to make off the data, I would do that. I would never show a dashboard ever again, because then you remove the interpretation, you remove the problems, and you communicate directly, hey, I looked at the numbers, this is what's happening, this is what needs to go on, this is what we need to do. Because if you think about it, you'll spend most of your time explaining like conversion rate went up because impressions went down. And they won't really, people like those stakeholders whose eyes are rolling back, they don't understand that. They don't know what that means for them. But if you're like, yeah, so like that's not even something I think you need to even bring up with them. You'd be like, well, we have fewer people coming to our site. And that's it. And so we need to get more people coming to the site. And you never can bring up CVR because it doesn't mean anything to them. It doesn't matter. And like, you know, if you're going over your own performance and you're saying, you know, well, like I'm justifying my own performance this month. If it's that kind of meeting, right? Not like a strategy meeting, but it's like, all right, I paid you 10 grand. What happened? You know, I think it behooves you to like my favorite thing is you show a huge mass of really complicated data really fast, and then you just move on. And the next slide is, here's what all that means. And, you know, rather than having a deck on screen and being like, this is what we're looking at, and trying to like interpret it for them, you remove the deck, you stop your screen share, you put yourself right in the face of the camera, and you just say, this is what happened and this is what we need to do. And if they start being like, well, what evidence do you have for that? Then you start going into those numbers, and then they'll be like, oh God, okay, just take me to that, back to what you were talking about before, right? So I think for the people who are very, very data heavy, what they want to do is they want to say, they want to do what a scientist would do, which is what a good scientist would do, which is sit down and get in super detailed and be like, well, this happened, which affected this variable and this variable and this variable. But like stakeholders don't care about that. They don't care about the forest, right? They want a straight line through it. They don't want to be walked through the forest and shown every single tree. They just want, how do I get through this? And so the faster you can get to that, the better. For the people who are coming from, let's say, a more communication heavy background, who don't know the data as well, this actually works in your favor, because you could spend your time being like, do I even understand what the right decision to make is? And then you focus on what it means for the stakeholder. And then like let your analysts like make a big old dashboard full of stuff for you. And then if they keep trying to point out stuff on the dashboard, you go, don't look at the dashboard. It's confusing. It's confounding. That flies in the face of how we have done data work for like the last 40 years. So like there's going to be a serious like adjustment period where people are used to trusting you and having a conversation directly with you instead of using a dashboard or a report with visuals as like some sort of like translation tool, because they want to understand. They want to understand that they're making the right decisions. If you can win that trust early, even if your experiments are totally just destroyed wasteland of results, like if you can build trust with them that these are the decisions I'm making and why I'm making them. If you want to get more detailed, we can, but I'm not going to waste your time with all this complicated data. Like I'm going to get you results now. Usually business owners like reply to that, but be ready when the one statistician is in the meeting and is like, can you go back to that model for me and like show me that? Like be ready for that. I would quite often make these decks that have like 3 slides and then like 15 in the appendix. So if they try and come at me with like, can I check your math? I'm like, oh, you want to check my math? Like, oh, I got all the receipts. Like, let's go. Like, let's go. I ran this 3 times. Like, and not just communicating effectively with stakeholders, that creates a really wonderful feedback loop within yourself as a data person, where you're being really authentic and honest and actually doing the work and not just like BSing your way through this job.
Yeah, exactly. And for the majority of brands, where do you think that the biggest advantage comes from at the moment? Is it data and attribution, or is it creative?
Hands down, creative and messaging. And I say that because it's the hardest thing to do right. Because like performance creative is such a new-ish thing that it's very difficult to hire people for it. If you have great data, that's great. Great data does not a multi-million-dollar company make. It does not. Like it is the new basic standard. Everyone at your company should understand how to use data in their own work. That is an internal competitive advantage. Like if your HR team understands how to constantly run employee surveys and judge the health of the business and identify issues, that's an advantage. If your performance marketing team knows how to like run really good experiments, that's a great advantage. If your business team is really smart with their seasonality and how they're identifying incrementality in their ad spend and all that, like that is an advantage. But at the end of the day, none of this is going to matter if you do not have a good product that fits naturally into some wonderful messaging. Like, and we're an industry full of really smart data people, and the creative people are like doing cooler stuff elsewhere. So it's really difficult to find and hire people who are interested in being like, yeah, I want to create ads or content with the goal of selling something. Usually people would want to make, art for other reasons, or they would want to make content for other reasons, or they have these other things they want to do. So I think creative is the ultimate competitive advantage. The best thing that you could do would be to build a really strong team focused around a creative team, creative directors, producers, editors, a strong core in-house team that is making stuff that people on the internet actually want to watch. And then all this data work that we find so natural, like maybe the people listening to this podcast find natural, definitely not everyone else, that we find natural, gets to work with a really solid creative place. And it's hard because, and gets to work with really solid creative material that they then can report off of. And it's hard because brand creativity feels so subjective, and it so often is so subjective that that's not what people want to track. We want to track what we can track. That's how data works. So for me, if you can build a really strong in-house creative team that can make a lot of stuff in-house, but then also manage a really diverse and talented set of freelancers, agencies, offshore editors, whatever you might want to use, you're going to get to, and then have them have a nice feedback loop with your data team, you're going to get to really wonderful ad performance and scalability really fast. But that is the hardest thing to do, is like, how are you going to build a space where a creative could join your company and be happy? That is like so difficult, because what motivates a person who is just overflowing with ideas and creativity and art is not necessarily what an agency can offer. And that creates a really challenging situation. And it's something I don't think everyone's nailed exactly, but it is worth the time investment, the inevitable failure and restarts. Like, it is worth it, because at the end of the day, you get one squatty potty ad that gets 150 million views, and then you never look back. Like, yeah.
And I think that's one of the big parts of it, is how do you create that feedback loop between your performance marketing and your creative team? And this was something that we were definitely 100% guilty of, was that the usual workflow for a performance marketer and briefing with the creative is writing the brief. The brief goes into Asana, or it goes into ClickUp. It's in progress, it's in review. And then the feedback that the creative gets is, this is approved, or hey, thanks, this is great, it went live. And the loop stops there. And what we found was that there was a massive gap for the creatives, where they were just like, great, like, I produced an asset. But what they actually craved was, they wanted to know the life of their piece of content beyond that. So when it went into a campaign, how did it perform? What were the click-through rates? And of course, there's an education piece that needs to be done in terms of educating them about a click-through rate, or about average watch times, or about the 3-second impression rates. But once you start to educate them and bring them into this process, what we found was that they really got behind the gamification of it, so that when you're reporting on the click-through rates of different ads, they found it a challenge to actually improve that the next week or the week after in their next briefs. And then we started to also bring in the performance marketing metrics and KPIs, such as ROAS and revenue. And what we tried to create internally was a culture where we celebrate the performance, so that we're getting the performance marketers to shout about the performance of ads, and letting the creative team hear about it. So, hey, so-and-so, your ad that you created actually generated this amount of revenue for this business. And what you end up with is a creative team where they're sat there going, whoa, this is cool. That piece of content that I made from some rough video footage has generated this amount of revenue. And when you bring people into that process, this is what helps you to push the needle with your performance creative. And it's how you build brands along the way. And what we find is that's the secret sauce to success with paid social at the moment. There's a lot of businesses out there that are really heavily focused on attribution software, and attribution software is should be the cherry on the cake. And I made a post on LinkedIn the other day, and it absolutely went off with the conversation on attribution. So I'm going to avoid that one.
I'm gonna swerve that subject a little bit.
I'm happy with that.
Okay, and going into a new role, I'm really curious, is there like any SaaS tools that you're like, I have to bring these tools with me?
Yes. So before I get into that, because this does play into the SaaS tools I use, play into that, that feedback loop that you're talking about, for everybody listening to this, go and look up what tech people are doing in the terms of like Agile and like how they manage their 2-week sprints. That is the perfect project management framework to do exactly what you're saying, creating that feedback loop. We have, every 2 weeks are compartmentalized at my company. Everybody works in this 2-week time where they finish certain tasks. At the end of that 2 weeks, we have a literal 4-hour meeting where creatives, data people, strategy people, project managers, business people, customer service people sit down and have a real, honest, structured, but also somewhat unstructured chat about that performance. And when you do that, you build that communication and that collaboration where they're forced to speak each other's languages, where, I have an analyst who would work on, who would be like, oh, we need to run more of these ads because they had a really great conversion rate. And then the creative is like, what is a conversion rate? And like the analyst, and I'm like, you know what? Why don't you answer that? Like, direct report number 3, like, you can do that. And it creates a much smoother marketing team. So for those people trying to implement what you're saying, look up Agile. It's perfect for this. And it is my new company religion. So, there's that. As far as SaaS tools fitting in that framework of what I exactly need, I vacillate between wanting cutting edge stuff and wanting stuff that I know I can hire people to use. So like I really prefer having a simple stack of Asana, Google Drive, and Slack. Like, I think if you have these things, because everyone's using Gmail, like, let's be honest, like some of the big teams are using Outlook or whatever. But people don't have Outlook for fun, and they don't have Teams for fun, whereas they have Slack for fun, and they have, Gmail on their own, and they're very used to it. And it takes a lot of the onboarding off of my team members. Asana is perfect for that. Sprint, Focus, and I have every single thing that I ever do is done in Asana. I'm like a power user where I use the reports in there and everything, like real crazy stuff. And if you do that, it's really useful for getting stuff done. It's also useful for understanding your employees and what they do and who needs help, really, right? And what tasks and what departments are getting stuff done and who's not, and who needs more resource or less resource. So love that stuff. Other things that I super enjoy, let's see. So as far as my performance marketing stack goes, we just turned on, and I know we're not going to get into attribution, but we just turned on Northbeam with an understanding that this view through attribution is modeled, same as it's modeled at Facebook, but we trust that directionally. So we just turned on Northbeam. I really love it. There are some competitors out there that are similar. I think Northbeam is the most established in this space, and the metrics that they show as far as creating a, to your point in the attribution you talked about, where there's multiple touch points in a customer's experience, the metrics that Northbeam shows makes a lot of sense to me. I've used Triple Whale in the past and made my own dashboards that do this work. And I think Northbeam's going to take a lot of that off of my plate, which is useful for a lean team. Other stuff I like, for SMS, you need to have SMS. I don't care who you are. It's very effective right now. You need to have SMS. How you achieve that is up to you. Like Attentive has had a lot of problems in the past. I was just on a call with them earlier, and they've added a lot of functionality that I super like now, that I'm like kind of excited to get back into. So using that. If you are a company with a lot of external data, I would actually, and I haven't used it in a while, but I would actually recommend Alteryx. It's a bit of an old school type of product. Like they don't even have a Mac dashboard, like a Mac like desktop version. It might have launched by now. I haven't checked. It's been a while since I checked in. Sorry, John, if you're listening to this, but I really love it. Is Excel 2.0, truly. The level of automation of data cleaning that you could do so effectively, so quickly is like really shocking. So if you've never heard of it, it's Alter, ALTERYX. This company out of Colorado, I love them. And there was a point in my career where I was like, if I'm going to come here, you have to buy this. I'm not going to come here if you don't buy this for me. Other stuff I use, I really love Google Colaboratory. It's just taken a lot of the effort out of my Python work. If I do, want to dive in and run some models, that is truly all that I need at this time. There are certain things I like to use, like I will use Typeform for customer surveys. There's a lot of like little competitors out there that do a lot of different things, whether it's, a tool like Yotpo for your reviews or whatever. But as far as like my internal, where we manage and task and do everything, I really like doing everything in Google Drive. We'll have Notion for a company wiki, but that's it. Like I won't do any note taking or anything in there, but it's much more useful as a company wiki than Drive is. Sometimes your team needs your creative team needs a digital asset manager, which I think once you start hitting a level of iteration, it's like really critical. Binder has a wonderful sort of workflow that fits really well into the way you want to review things. And also it can like chop and automatically export in the right ratios that you need. It just like speeds all that up. So my key stack really is Google. And part of that is because what Google's doing with Drive, Collaboratory, Data Studio is they're trying to corner the marketing market.
Yeah.
So all of their tools are like designed for us by people like us. And so you'll be shocked if you've never used Data Studio before, you'll be shocked at like how quickly you pick it up. And I'm like, yeah, because it was made for you. If you're a performance marketer, this was made for you. And all the integrations that you don't have to pay for, like, it's just so nice. So I'm very Google heavy in what I do.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting what you said about Northbeam, and we haven't had a chance to use it just yet. So I'm probably going to check back in with you in a couple of weeks to find out about how you're getting on with using it and a bit of an update. But I totally agree with you regarding Triple Whale, and what we found is that Triple Whale is great for people who don't know how to use Data Studio, but if you have a good understanding of using Data Studio, you could probably save yourself quite a bit of cash each month by just building something for yourself. One of the questions that we like to ask every guest that comes on the show is, what are your big predictions for e-commerce over the next 12 months?
I think, and I'm not the first person to say this, but I think it has never been easier to start a brand. As a sole practitioner, you can jump on your computer, your little 13-inch MacBook on a beach somewhere and build a brand that hits $1 million. What is going to be really hard is growing your brand beyond that. I think then this is for a number of reasons. One, we're like walking into an economic recession worldwide. So people spend less. Those of you who are listening to this podcast who think that your brand just magically finally took off during the COVID times, you're wrong. Your brand took off because like people were spending money online, and you have to, now that you've hit that COVID double jump, you have to land it. It's going to be harder than ever to hit the ROAS numbers you think you deserve. It's going to be harder than ever to hire people properly. It's going to be harder than ever to motivate people to work. Like, how are you going to get people to work when you're like, come back to the office? You know, how are they? They're not going to want to work for you. I think that we are walking into a real reckoning with DTC brands where, and e-commerce in general, where over the next 2, 3, 4 years, we're going to have to do, brands who want to succeed are going to have to do the hard work that we've been talking about in this podcast. There's a lot of gritty, not fun, annoying, heartbreaking, serious ego smashing work that we've talked about that you have to do. Like, is your product even good? Like, no one wants to have that conversation, right? But that's what you have to do in order to really nail down growth, and you have to manage your expectations. You know, we have to know that being in a digital world like we are, the rules of 1 year ago don't apply to today. As a data scientist, every data scientist who has done any sort of modeling since 2020 has had all of their predictive models ruined entirely by a global shift in consumer behavior. So now we can't even accurately predict a week from now, let alone a year. So I think things are going to get really, really tough. And it didn't earn me any love in the interviews I've been doing, and it doesn't, you know, make clients like me very much. But to go back to the sports metaphor I started in the beginning, it's the hard work that creates a championship team. It is the stupid stuff. It is doing the uncommon. It's doing the common thing, like being diligent about your tasks, being diligent about managing expectations, being diligent about challenging your own expectations. It's that boring stuff, doing that an uncommon amount of times. Like, if every single day you're being like, why is our business working and why is it not? And being really realistic about that, you'll be able to navigate this really tough time that we're going into. I think you're going to see lots of brands that are beloved just fold. I think you're going to see lots of brands that are well established have a lot of struggles. I think you're not going to see as many unicorns. If you do, it's going to be based off of grift. You know, I was just watching that new Theranos Dropout show last night, and I was like, you know, this is just not going to be as possible anymore. VCs are wising up too. They want to start seeing more profit. You can't just scale forever on, VC cash and hope that you land it. At the same time, you can't just throw money on Facebook and grow. So there's like a really nasty future, I think, coming in. It's kind of annoying as a growth marketer. It's not going to be easy, but it's going to create a lot of character. And if you're somebody who's trying to get into growth marketing, or somebody's trying to do performance marketing at this time, like, congratulations, welcome to the rebuild. Welcome to the bottom of the sine curve, the wave or whatever, where like the work that we do now is going to dictate how the rules are set in the future. And like, so it's important for us to be like very realistic about what's happening around us, what we're doing in our day to day. And I don't think it's going to be easy for anyone. And if somebody is finding it easy, or they are finding one hack that 10x's their Facebook account, I just don't trust them. I'm like, you're lying or you're cheating, and that loophole is going to like close. The constant arbitrage you hear on Twitter or whatever all the time, right? I don't believe in arbitrage. I believe in hard work. I believe in honest authenticity, focus, creating something that's actually good, that actually solves a problem, that people actually want it. Like, and that sounds very fundamental, but it's critical. And I see so many brands being like, I think I can just kind of skate through with some nice branding, or I could skate through with it's an okay product, but I don't have that great of ads, or I don't want to do any brand building, or, whatever it is. You have to do the dirty work. You have to rebuild your team from scratch and do the honest stuff. So to answer your question, it's going to be really tough. Major predictions. You're going to see a lot of people you love fold. You're going to see you're going to see all these wonderful little DTC companies getting bought up by larger holding companies. You're already seeing that. I think you'll see it speed up. So like Onnit got bought when they hit 50. Like all these little food and bev companies are going to start getting bought up, like probably at lower numbers. And when the founders are struggling to find like competitive advantages in their ads, they're going to be looking for exits faster, especially if they have VC sort of expectations placed upon them. I mean, we just saw this, I can't remember when Mirror sold, and it was supposed to be $1 billion, sold for 500 million, right? Like, so, if you're thinking about jumping into a startup brand or a small DTC brand on the brand side, be aware that like, it's not going to be all sunshine and roses, even though that's what they demand in your first interview. It's not going to be that. So you're going to want that from your leadership team, and you're going to, and also you're going to want to know what the path of the company is. What is our goal? Are we going to sell? Because you don't want to be left, without equity, or stuck in a spot where the company gets sold and you just get trashed and you don't get hired anywhere else and you don't have another job lined up. So just for the practitioners themselves, it's going to be a wild west out there, y'all. But this is the time when people who are committed to doing the right work will succeed.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point, and such a great way to finish a wonderful conversation today, that the marketers of today are going to shape the future of tomorrow. Bryan, I've absolutely loved our conversation, and I feel like I've learned tons today speaking to you, and I really, really hope that the people listening to the episode are also going to have learned a lot. And I'm really looking forward to getting an update from you in the future about how you're getting on with the use of Northbeam and all the cool things that you're doing in your new role. Bryan, I've loved every second of it.
Of course. Thank you. I always love talking about this stuff because it helps me like understand what I do even better. So it's always a joy to chat with you, man. And I'll come back anytime.
Amazing. I'll hold you to that one.